If you look at the degree to which Silicon Valley has become the government, and the government has become Silicon Valley, I mean, at least the Trump family is becoming venture capitalists, investors, crypto moguls. Then you add on to that both of them are animated by these apocalyptic religious ideas of a great transformation that's right around the corner. The tech guys through the TESCREAL ideas, transhumanism, extropianism, long-termism, etc. The MAGA base by the evangelical Christian eschatology that Trump is here at the dawn of the apocalyptic era. That bundling of state with corporate, with religion, in this aggressive, monopolistic package of power is the heart of fascism.
Going back decades, there's been a faction active in Silicon Valley whose chief interests were not coding, consumer technology, or even business, but power. Accumulating and wielding power. In some ways, the story of the last 10 years of the tech industry has been the story of that faction, perhaps best embodied by Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, but also including those like Mark Andreessen.
You don't have any levels of introspection.
Yes, zero, as little as possible.
Why?
Move forward, go.
And Alex Karp, Palmer Luckey, and David Sachs, winning the power that they sought. And the consequences have been disastrous. I'm Brian Merchant, and this is Blood in the Machine, a show about tech, labor, and power. Made for you. Everyone Silicon Valley is happening to. Today, I sit down with Gil Duran, a veteran journalist and author of the Nerd Reich, Silicon Valley Fascism, and the War on Democracy, to discuss how exactly this disaster has unfolded and where it's left us. It's hard to overstate the import of the ascendancy of the tech right.
But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through a technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics. The task in this world where politics has become so broken and so dysfunctional is to find a way to escape from it. It's not a way to fix it, it is a way to escape.
These figures now have a direct line to the White House. They have one of their own in the White House, in former VC J.D. Vance, and they are often in the White House themselves. They hold massive government contracts, and their unprecedented hordes of lobbying cash and influence shapes public policy, in addition to controlling much of the digital architecture that guides our daily lives already. The results of all of this are everywhere you look. This is, yes, how you get Doge running wild in the federal government, laying off hundreds of thousands of civil servants. Widespread cronyism and corruption in Washington, with government figures embracing crypto and the AI industry and enriching themselves in the process. It's also how you get tech CEOs rising into a class that more resembles an oligarchy than the mere ultra-wealthy. One reason Facebook and Meta have operated with such impunity over the years is that Peter Thiel helped Mark Zuckerberg structure his company in such a way that he would retain super voting shares and would be unaccountable to a board of directors or anyone else. Just this week, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei announced he would be doing the same. He will essentially be impervious to boardroom dissent or activist shareholders. This means, for instance, that as users revolt over fears that the company's new watermarking process, which Anthropic has instituted to satisfy European Union regulations, will out them as AI spammers, it will ultimately be up to Amodei himself to decide what to do, and no one else. Now, members of what Duran calls the Nerd Reich use their power to further concentrate wealth and, of course, gain more power. A report by the AFL-CIO's Executive Pay Watch found this week that Elon Musk's Tesla pay in 2025, he took home $158 billion, was an astonishing 2.5 million times his average worker's salary. As the lead researcher on the report told Fortune, it's unlike anything we've seen before. Now, tech CEOs operating at such a distance from ordinary people may also explain why they're so willing to undertake practices and push products that large swaths of the public absolutely hate. We already well know that data center opposition is the single unifying political issue most Americans are against, and that Gen Z is vehemently anti-AI. But consider also Meta's marquee new product, AI glasses that allow users to film people without their consent, and that have already been dubbed pervert glasses by the masses. Just this week, Futurism published a report about how the glasses are being used by bullies in schools to harass their peers, especially girls. The bullies are apparently aping tactics seen on viral videos in which pickup artists film women they're hitting on without consent, hence the pervert glasses name. This is perhaps providing fuel for another future lawsuit. This week, Meta goes to court against 29 U.S. state attorneys general who accuse the company of knowingly designing addictive products that harm the mental health of children, and they're seeking $200 billion in damages. It might also explain why tech CEOs are willing to scan and destroy books en masse to feed them into their AI systems, despite the horror most people experience when they hear about such a practice. In a report that's almost too on the nose for a segment discussing the Nerd Reich, 404 Media had a rare bookseller put an AirTag in a book bought by a mystery buyer, and it wound up in an Amazon facility expressly designed to scan and mulch books to train the company's large language models. At the very same time, meanwhile, AI-generating books are flooding Amazon's online marketplace and crowding out real authors who are earning less and less for their own human-authored books. As a result of all of the above, there is a powerful, enraged backlash growing against the nation tech oligarchs, multi-billionaire AI CEOs, and the Nerd Reich, whatever you want to call it. Now, I've been covering the tech sector for nearly 2 decades now, and I've never seen anything like this. People are shouting down big tech reps and data center proponents at public meetings. Flock, the private provider of police surveillance equipment like ALPRs, has been under siege for months. A national week of action against their product is underway right now, as I record this. A survey conducted by CNBC found that young people aged 18 to 34 found tech CEOs overwhelmingly untrustworthy. As Futurism put it, quote, "Young people hate AI CEOs so passionately that it's almost hard to believe. Even Elon Musk's own AI bot Grok has appeared to turn against him, accusing him of watching child porn and calling for his assassination on X." The tech elite may have the wealth, the influence, and the ear of the president, but not even that can insulate them from a growing mass movement, increasingly intent on taking them on. And we have every reason to think that what we're seeing is only the beginning. And now let's turn to Gil Duran and dig into the Nerd Reich, how it took root, how it rose to power, and how it might fall. All right, I am here with Gil Duran, the author of The Nerd Reich, the new and almost certainly soon-to-be best-selling book. It's just been everywhere. The success has been tremendous, which is wonderful. You know, as somebody who spends a lot of time around tech-critical books, they don't always get the attention they deserve, and this one certainly is. You've been on Fresh Air. You've been doing the rounds. You've been getting press. People are talking about this book. So first of all, congratulations, and welcome to Blood in the Machine, Gil.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So let's just start from the beginning. What is the Nerd Reich, as you define it?
The Nerd Reich is a cult of Silicon Valley billionaires who believe it is their destiny to overthrow democracy in the 21st century using technology. Specifically, they believe that technologies like crypto and AI and increasingly surveillance technology and defense technology will be the keys to world power in the coming decades. And they believe that they have those keys, and they don't understand why something as vulnerable and silly as democracy should stand in their way. And I didn't come up with the name. A lot of people give me credit for that name, but after I'd written a few stories about these guys for the New Republic in 2024, someone reached out to me from the crypto world, someone kind of well known, and said, you know, we've been calling these guys the Nerd Reich for years. And I immediately searched for the URL to see, does someone already have this? And no one was really using it. In fact, somebody had the Reddit group and they gave it to us. And so we're like, hey, use it, you know? So, so I rebranded my little newsletter.
So like a fellow traveler in the crypto, or like another crypto like industry, participant or programmer or developer or somebody who's kind of came along and was like, these guys kind of they embarrass us too, or they're like, we are aware of them or whatnot.
Exactly. Someone who largely agrees with them on a lot of things, who's deeply into these ideas. But even for those folks, it was like, okay, but this whole Nazi tinged rule the world, overthrow democracy thing is a step too far. And I'm not really in touch with that person. They went off. They have some pretty radical politics of their own. But I thought that was very telling and important that their own peer group had applied this moniker to them. And so that's why I took it and it changed everything. I think, I think probably 80% of the reason my book is getting attention is because of the name. So,
yeah, well, names are important. It's a clever and memorable coinage. And let's talk about the genesis. This has been sort of in the works, and in fact, like the project of your book is largely to chart how sort of these ideas went from fringe in some regards, or under the surface, or adhered to only by a small sort of cohort back in the 90s, and increasingly kind of became more widely shared among the Silicon Valley elite class. And you start, I think, as such tales should, with Peter Thiel. It's not totally fair. You also start, you lay the groundwork and you talk about all of the different factors that are kind of percolating in Silicon Valley in the 90s, with sort of the different strains of sort of the counterculturalism and the sort of the curdling of some of those sort of 60s utopians, and then sort of Fred Turner's treatment of the counterculture to cyberculture. But you really pick up your story in the 90s with a particular book, a book that was popular with Peter Thiel. Can you talk about sort of number one, why this is sort of what you arrived at as sort of the the origin story for the Nerd Reich, and and what that book is and what it says?
There are definitely much deeper origins that one could go into. In fact, I cut a whole section of the book that my editor called the bibliography, right? Because I felt like I got to show how we get all the way from monarchy to modern fascism and tech fascism. But there are academics who do that kind of work. And there are people who have written important books that deserve to be read. I've been very inspired by the work of Quinn Slobodian. Hayek's Bastard spills out a lot of this ideology in a detail that I don't fully go into. In the 90s, there was a Wired writer named Paulina Borsuk who warned in Cyber Selfish that these guys are anti-government freaks, and good thing they're not too involved in politics yet. Her book's being reissued next month with a new introduction by me. And other writers, Fred Turner you mentioned. So there was some...
Malcolm Harris too, Palo Alto.
Malcolm Harris. I quote Palo Alto. That was like the first book I grabbed to be like, okay, let me start deep diving into all this stuff. And we could probably do a whole episode about everybody who tried to warn the world and doesn't make millions of dollars on a podcast these days. But I chose the sovereign individual because it was a recurring theme in some of these works, and it coincided with when this really started to become an acutely radical idea. The Sovereign Individual is a 1997 book by James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg. And these are two guys who met at Oxford University in the early 80s. William Rees-Mogg was sort of a patrician conservative guy who was an editor and journalist for many, many years, very well known. James Dale Davidson was more of a conspiracy theorist and investment newsletter guy. Back in the 80s and 70s and 90s, there were these investment newsletters always predicting doom, but if you make these investments and buy gold, etc., you'll be fine. And they wrote 3 books together that were really doom-tinged books, always predicting some kind of imminent collapse, but also recommending investments that could help keep you on top of things. Kind of prepper stuff, basically. Prepper stuff for people who are investors. And The Sovereign Individual was their magnum opus, even though it wasn't a bestseller. And the thesis of The Sovereign Individual was that in the 21st century, technology would destroy the nation state system and create a new class of so-called sovereign individuals or cognitive elites, a term taken from eugenics, who would now roam the world with their networked capitalism and be free of democracy, law, and regulation, and that they should collect multiple passports, and that way they could flip between different countries, which would now design programs to appeal to them and give them whatever they wanted as nations like the United States collapsed into chaos and violence due to the collapsed economy and the end of the welfare state. The two technologies in particular that were focused on by the sovereign individual were something called cyber currency, a new kind of digital money that would undermine government authority and allow wealthy people to exfiltrate their wealth from the system, and advanced automation, which would suck out all the value of labor, destroy jobs, replace workers, and thereby lead to the economic collapse, which would then trigger the collapse of the country. We would call that today AI. That's very much the narrative pushed by AI companies today, is that it's going to kill all the jobs, but don't worry, we won't have chaos and violence. We'll have super duper abundance. So it's a crazy kooky book, and it comes out and it's badly reviewed. It's apocalyptic. No one felt this stuff in the late 90s. Like, it seemed far-fetched. And there were a lot of doom-tinged books around the end of the 20th century that it was a genre.
So, and that's important. Like, so these guys are saying the world is going to collapse, nations are going to dissolve, but that is ultimately a good thing. And if you listen to us, you can get in on it. And it almost, sort of flatters a certain, group of people by saying, okay, well, there's the cognitive elite. And if you're reading this book, there's, the subtext is there's a good chance that you are one, right?
Oh, definitely. Well, one of the wannabe sovereign individuals or cognitive elites who read this book was Peter Thiel, who was then a young man in Palo Alto hanging around Stanford University, even though he'd already graduated. And he was so inspired by this apocalyptic book that he has credited it with being part of the inspiration for PayPal, which he said was an effort to get ahead of this coming digital currency that would transform everything. And by 1999, he's giving speeches in, I believe it was October of 1999. Peter Thiel gives this speech in Oakland to something called the Independent Institute, where he says there's this currency coming, this digital currency that won't be stopped. Washington will be too stupid to do anything about it. And in there, he says that the individual will become sovereign. And basically, he's echoing the sovereign individual and predicting the rise of crypto as this unstoppable political force.
Rid of money altogether, going from digital dollars, from any kind of government-backed currency, to purely private currencies. And what a private currency, or what private money, I think, fundamentally means is that there is no medium of exchange. You exchange value for value rather than exchanging value for something the government says has value for value. And whenever you have this intermediate step of the government saying something has value, that's where you have the subterfuge, the sort of legerdemain come in, the game of musical chairs, where every now and then a chair gets pulled out, and it turns out that you're the one holding a dollar bill that's all of a sudden become worth a little bit less.
And he has continued to spread this book around Silicon Valley to other future billionaires and tech moguls. And in 2020, when this crazy apocalyptic conspiracy theorist book was re-released, he wrote the new introduction for it. And throughout his career, I named this in the book, he has name-checked the sovereign individual as an inspiration. And the thing to understand that'll help people understand how crazy the book is, James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg were also spreading the whole Clinton body count conspiracy theory from the 90s. If people are too young to remember, there was this idea that when Clinton was president, he just had a bunch of people killed. And it was like the beginning of the Fox News, Newsmax, right-wing fever swamp conspiracy theories that end up giving us January 6th and Donald Trump, etc. Right? It's like they were into crazy, kooky things. A lot of their predictions, most of their predictions completely failed to materialize. And a lot of dummies in Silicon Valley think that, wow, the sovereign individual predicted crypto and AI, but they were just rehashing ideas that already existed. Futurists, technologists have been writing about this stuff, science fiction. So they just like, hey, let's scrape all these ideas into a new book that that backs up our ongoing John Birch Society doomer apocalypse thesis. In fact, James Dale Davidson was still predicting doom in 2012. Remember the whole 2012s, everything's going to change.
Mayan calendar.
Mayan prophecy. He was on that with a new version of the scam. And then 2016, there was going to be another big collapse. Now he's kind of old. I think he's done with the videos. But my point being that people in Silicon Valley, journalists, often describe, not us journalists, but the big journalists, the establishment journalists, describe Peter Thiel as a philosopher or an intellectual. He's none of those things. He got inspired by a kooky ass conspiracy theory book with no academic integrity or credibility at all, and he has
held
made
on to it for 25 years. Apparently,
it's the central prophecy of his entire life.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And then so he does sort of, use this language. And, even today you still see, as you said, he's writing the intro to the book, the introduction to the book, a quarter century later, and he's still circulating these ideas. You still hear some sort of like nuggets of the terminology there. And yeah, reading your book, and that's it's funny you mentioned sci-fi, because that's exactly how I kind of position this. A lot of these tech titans are infatuated with sci-fi, especially the sci-fi books that they read when they're young. And then sort of they set them as aspirational goalposts. So you have like Mark Zuckerberg reads Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, which coined the metaverse. And then he tries to make that real. Many such examples, Sam Altman and Her with OpenAI. And you have Peter Thiel here reading, about the sovereign individual and all these ideas about sort of a much more apocalyptic than even Snow Crash, which is dystopian itself. And then trying to realize that almost, it's not that, to me, it seems less that it's like this book is predictive, but more a coterie of very wealthy and increasingly influential Silicon Valley billionaires set that as their aspirational goalpost. They said, this is what we think is not only going to happen, but should happen. And then they make their bets, and you cover sort of Peter Thiel's checkered kind of thousands. He makes the big influential bet in Facebook, which really turns him into a billionaire. But we forget that he also, listening to the sovereign individual, listening to the advice kind of given by them, as you document, he like makes a bunch of bad bets, when he's playing the market. He bets on currency at a time when like all boats are rising. He is like making some really bad bets on currency because that's what these authors said to do. And it kind of takes us to the end of the 2000s, as you sort of mentioned earlier, where, he originally kind of described himself as a libertarian, right? There was a subset of guys who said, we're libertarians, we believe in the power of markets and technology. But by the end of the 2000s, as you write, Peter Thiel was more or less done with that, and that's, I think, an important turning point also, because that's when he says it all out loud.
Definitely. What's interesting, too, in addition to calling Peter Thiel philosophical and intellectual, people have also called him a libertarian for a long time. And he's not a libertarian. By the early 2000s, he had co-founded Palantir with an investment from the CIA's venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel, and was a government military surveillance contractor. And how can you be a libertarian, which is supposed to be opposed to government power and any kind of intervention in your privacy, etc., and a military government intelligence contractor? But one thing I'll give Thiel credit for is that he seems to know that the establishment is so stupid they won't see the contradiction in those terms. If he labels himself a libertarian, then because he's rich, people will just follow his lead and take him at his word. But even as he gains in wealth and success, his mindset only seems to become more dark and apocalyptic. And by 2009, right when Obama got elected, and most people were feeling this kind of hopey, changey thing at the time, Thiel declares that freedom and democracy are no longer compatible. And he becomes a billionaire in 2012 because of Facebook, but continues to just worry that everything is on the decline, everything is going to collapse. And in the meantime, he's made a new friend. When he wrote that freedom and democracy were no longer compatible, he said that it was because since the 1920s, now women can vote, other people can vote, It's not the party we once had in terms of, a wonderful society. It's declining because of the extension of the voting franchise to too many people. And he came under fire for saying that, because people were like, well, what are you talking about? You're saying women and people of color shouldn't vote. They ruined everything. And he had to add a defense to his essay saying he didn't mean to say anybody should lose the right to vote. But one of his most full-throated defenders at that moment was this anonymous blogger called Mencius Moldbug, who wrote a post called Democrophobia Goes Slightly Viral, because Mencius Moldbug had been militating against democracy publicly for quite some time. And Mencius Moldbug's real name was Curtis Yarvin, a mediocre computer programmer out of San Francisco who, after doing tremendous amounts of LSD and living off of his wife and his mother for many years, had written a fantasy version of fascism for the 21st century. And soon after that, according to the New Yorker, Thiel and Yarvin met. So Yarvin's fawning defense of Thiel's anti-democratic ideas is what creates this new relationship that ends up becoming pretty important in the future.
Yeah. And so that's a pathway. For those who haven't heard of Curtis Yarvin, I think many listeners at this point have, because of this introduction, again, as you document in the book, this sort of Peter Thiel kind of provides him with a megaphone and an on-ramp onto sort of the tech right superhighway. He's already kind of popular in these sort of bloggy communities where people are sort of arguing and sort of mounting sort of the defenses of various ideas, but it's mostly contained to sort of a community that's already interested in that stuff. With Peter Thiel and sort of the ascendancy of his cohort, and Thiel's money also, Yarvin begins to sort of enter the mainstream, and as you note, he starts to be picked up by figures eventually like J.D. Vance, who quotes him on the campaign trail. Could you talk a little bit about sort of Yarvin's sort of core ideas? He was, as you already said, very sort of anti-democracy and pro-modern monarchy, or wanted the nation to be run like a CEO and all of those things. But he also had this idea of the cathedral that was quite influential and popular among the tech right. Can you talk about that?
As with the sovereign individual, Thiel spreads Yarvinism through his circle of friends and people he influences. And that's important. People often, some of my critics are like, you pay too much attention to Yarvin. He's a ridiculous clown. He has no power. But the importance of Yarvin is how important he is to these powerful men. Why would you have anything to do with this guy? Why would you even know his name? You should be like, oh, that's stupid, whatever. But instead they embrace him. He and Mark Andreessen have brunch and they text, and Yarvin becomes this important figure to these guys. And Yarvin's key idea is that democracy is an outdated software system that should be replaced with dictatorship, a monarchy controlled by a CEO, essentially. And that to do this, an authoritarian president should purge the federal government and completely use the power of the presidency to destroy the country and say, things are going to run differently now, and I'm in charge. He claims that the president has the power to do this. Obviously never took a civics class, doesn't understand our whole system of government, why we have a balance of powers, and how this came out of thousands of years of experimentation through Greece and Rome and the Iroquois Confederacy, you name it, right? Zero interest in any of that. And that the important thing to do, in addition to purging the federal government, is to destroy what Yarvin calls the cathedral, which is, in his telling, all of the institutions of democracy, universities, the media, science, anything that upholds democracy should be destroyed so that there's no one left to defend what was once the democratic system. And he compares it to a religion and says basically democracy is not really democracy. There's this cult of hidden liberals who secretly control everything, which is why Donald Trump has been elected president twice and why, like, whatever. It doesn't make any sense, right? But he's sort of a court jester telling these guys what they want to hear and saying out loud what a lot of people, I think, in Silicon Valley have said in private, what they believe in private, which some are now starting to say out loud. So these are deeply anti-American, anti-democracy ideas. And in many ways, they also resemble the ideas of the Nazis. The Nazis had a core idea called Führerprinzip, the idea that there should be one unitary, singular ruler whose word was the law. That's what Hitler became. The idea of Lebensraum, the idea that we need more land, we have to colonize more territories to give our people places to expand. Yarvin called this idea patchworks. He recommended breaking the country up into different little territories that would be run as sort of corporate dictatorship fiefdoms. He described a future San Francisco called Friscorp, where everyone would be under total constant surveillance. You'd have to scan in, scan out, and the government would be so powerful that it would have the power to execute its citizens for no cause. That's how absolute the power would be. And that poor people, unproductive people, could be turned into biodiesel to run the city's buses, or else locked into virtual reality prison cells where they would spend their unproductive lives in this bizarre altered reality where they couldn't hurt anybody or be a part of society, which is insane for many reasons, but especially since it would be much cheaper and more effective to give those people housing, food, healthcare, and help, rather than to lock them into a virtual reality prison. But he says what he's really looking for is a humane alternative to genocide. So this is someone with very extreme, genocidal, murderous, racist ideas. We do a whole podcast episode about the racism of Curtis Yarvin. But his words, his ideas become extremely important to this coterie of increasingly right-wing, increasingly wealthy men surrounding Peter Thiel. And they try to spread it also through the little culture of Silicon Valley, all the sort of empty-headed people who want to be startup founders and are willing to go along with whatever new zeitgeist gets promoted by the billionaires. And so you see this little wave of the neo-reactionary movement, the Dark Enlightenment, start to spread through Silicon Valley.
And he kind of, Yarvin, I agree that Yarvin is important, again, because he not only does he sort of represent sort of the views that maybe saying some of the things that they wish they could be saying as CEOs or VCs or more public figures, but he's also creating this permission structure where it's like where he's kind of expanding the bounds of what's permissible to say. Like, he's like, you can say that we don't want a democracy. We want sort of some modernized crypto king to rule us all. Like, okay, like people are out there saying that, and I can support him and I can agree with him. I don't have to say it myself, but I can tacitly kind of expand this idea that may be useful to me or that I may actually also believe. Now, with that sort of the Frisco Corp and sort of some of other Yarvin's ideas with monarchy, I think that's a good segue into sort of maybe what is sort of like the third ingredient of this thrust, which also is kind of the subject that you covered that maybe kind of launched this whole thing, which is this concept of the network state. It was kind of in its embryonic form when Peter Thiel back in the 2000s was talking about seasteading, which a lot of people just kind of laughed off, as you point out, the taking over an oil rig or building of some floating mechanism where you're not bound by laws. But then it does get advanced in some pretty, deliberate and more noxious ways than that. Can you talk about the network state?
So Peter Thiel starts searching for ways to escape nations. And the first idea, as you mentioned, is seasteading, building little independent territories out in the middle of the ocean, maybe on rusted oil rigs or on ships. And he funds this thing called the Seasteading Institute at first. But it turns out actually people don't want to live in the middle of the ocean. You can't really golf there, take a jog and shop and all the shit that makes society a fun place to be. Right?
Or you run out of the golf balls pretty fast, right?
Exactly. They'll just be, you have to go swim to get them. And so the idea goes back to the land. And Balaji Srinivasan, who is a former Andreessen Horowitz partner and a former chief technology officer of Coinbase, comes up with this idea called the network state and writes it in a 2022 book called The Network State: How to Start a New Country, which, by the way, is free to read. You can go find it online. There's a one-sentence version, a one-paragraph version, a one-page version, and a 400-page version. The thesis of the network state is that the United States is going to collapse, familiar theme here, in the 21st century because of a civil war that's already ongoing between the red tribe, Republicans, and the blue tribe, the Democrats. And what's going to make the difference in this war is the rise of a new gray tribe, this tech fascist tribe, essentially, that will partner with the red tribe to overthrow and purge the blue tribe. And the nation's going to be broken up into little pieces. And these will be corporate fiefdoms, essentially, called network states. Essentially, what Balaji did was steal Yarvin's patchwork idea and try to put it into a more startup-friendly, VC-friendly format. The idea that, look, this is the future. Get the community going, crowdfund the territory, and create your own nation. And this idea was developing at least since 2013 through Balaji. He gave a speech at Y Combinator in 2013 called Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit, where he basically said it was the precursor to his network state idea. There's going to be more countries born. Instead of starting a company, you should start a country. And Mark Andreessen, at the same time, predicts there's going to be hundreds or thousands of more countries born in the 21st century. This was an idea coming out of that venture capitalist class even back then. And in 2022, the book comes out, and now there's a venture capital fund, Pronomos Capital, dedicated to building these things around the world. And there's even a prototype in Honduras called Prospera, where some billionaires got together, bought some land, negotiated with the government to give them some limited autonomy and freedom to develop their own regulations, where they're conducting sort of unregulated medical treatments, etc. And there's even ideas to build one in Gaza, this new tech utopia being offered as a proposal for Gaza that Trump had tweeted out a video last year, an AI-generated video of a Trump resort and casino on the beach at Gaza with money raining from the sky.
Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1.
Trump's talking about stealing Greenland from Denmark sometimes, and there's a proposal to build a city there. More importantly, for the United States, in Trump's 2024 campaign plan, he had the idea for something called Freedom Cities, 10 new cities that would be created on federal land after a competition between corporations to develop the best idea. And while this was mentioned in Politico and a few other places, no one has ever explained in the mainstream media, what is a freedom city? Why do we need freedom cities? And where does the idea come from? It comes from the network state. And lately, you've seen people like Brian Armstrong of Coinbase, who is a big believer in the network state idea, calling for Trump to create freedom cities in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and other places, and to follow through on his promise to build freedom cities. Because, surprise, surprise, Grandpa Trump has sort of stopped talking about it and not really clear whether he's going to deliver on that in his lame duck era here. So this idea that once seemed crazy is now actually kind of being pushed by a group of venture capitalists quite openly. We see a project here in California, California Forever, funded partly by Mark Andreessen, which in very many ways fits the format of a network state type city. In fact, Balaji Srinivasan himself said at the Network State Conference, because they have an annual conference where they openly talk about this shit for 8 hours, that California Forever was a network state project. They deny it, but it's not clear why a bunch of billionaires secretly bought up 60,000 acres of land to build a new city in a place with no water, no roads, no infrastructure, a roster of endangered species, and a law specifically preventing this kind of project from being built there. So again, these crazy ideas that belong on the margins of the internet, or used to be, have now moved into the zeitgeist of a billionaire class that has increasingly seized power within the Trump administration. And so the network state is a specific cult of this idea. But again, it's the expression of this idea that technology and wealth are going to upend the order of the world in the 21st century, and that this transformation is at hand.
And that it will, importantly, it will leave the cognitive elite or the deserving, or a specific type of person in their mind sort of at the top calling the shots. And that is what, to me, seems like the common thread between all of these things, right? Like the network state, like, let's get rid of the governments, the regulations, the rules, the laws, the things that trip us up. We can be free to kick out the people that we don't like, that maybe don't look like us. And we can rule, basically. Kind of implicit is that rulership, and that becomes clear in sort of in your writing and your reporting. The cognitive elite. It's this incredibly flattering idea to a certain class of investor, tech founder, people who believe that they're sort of the Ayn Randian, John Galt's of the world, moving the world through which things would collapse if their genius wasn't operative narrative. And then through Yarvin's cathedral, it's really just, these are all the forces, the cathedral is just all the forces that appear arrayed against them: civil society, academia, journalism, things that point out, the errors of their ways, or their corruption, or that stand to sort of, serve as a bulwark to the public against these forces. So it really is wild seeing, chapter after chapter, the way that you render this, this sort of very sort of self-flattering, delusional sort of vein of fascism, which you call, the Nerd Reich or tech fascism. And I will just add, before we get to what's going on in the White House now, which you also cover quite ably, is that this is also, I think, increasingly clear that this is how they aspire to run their businesses too. And in fact, that's like sort of one of the laboratories that we can see what they would do. Over the last 10, 15 years, Peter Thiel's sort of approach, which has been to explicitly, pursue a monopoly and wipe everything else out of the market. His protege, another protege of his, was Sam Altman, who was following that blueprint with OpenAI. Be first to market, create your own market, push everybody out, then you get to call the shots and reap the rewards. That's what he sort of pushed Zuckerberg to do with Facebook and establish power. He gets Mark Zuckerberg's his super voting shares so that he's kind of a little, king of his company. The board can't vote him out because he has these super voting shares, because he structured Facebook, now Meta, the way that Peter Thiel wanted him to. So it's clear all along, I think, and now increasingly clear more than ever with the recent crop of AI companies, where it's just all about scale. Forget a workable business model. Forget like your employees' well-being or anything like that. Just scale, 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 and domination. So this ethos sort of crystallizes. There's a faction of Silicon Valley billionaires who have become more and more powerful, more and more vocal. They have sort of Trump's ear. How do we get from the sovereign individual, the cathedral, and the network state into the White House? And where are we now?
We're seeing a massive outbreak of billionaire psychosis. What happened was these guys got very, very, very rich. And the richer they got, the crazier they got. And the more they resented any idea of any limitation on their power. This is an ideology of supremacy, of white supremacy, of male supremacy, but it's fueled by tech supremacy and wealth supremacy, right? Without the money, they can't do all of this. Without the money, they're a bunch of nerds fantasizing on some blogs. But when you have billions and billions of dollars, you have the power to turn crazy ideas into reality. And I think that's one thing the political establishment and the establishment media largely missed, because they think they create reality. And for a long time they did. That is no longer the case. We live in a world where billionaires can just create realities. And that's what they're doing. I mean, Elon Musk bought X to twist the algorithm to the right. That's exactly what has happened, right? And now we're seeing that in some ways, because all prophecies are self-fulfilling, they have been able to push these crazy ideas into the center of our political system. Crypto was supposed to undermine government authority. But what's happening is crypto has now become the biggest monster in political spending. It's a gun to the head of American democracy right now with crypto cartels. I don't call them an industry. I do in the book, and I think that was a mistake. Crypto cartels. They don't really produce anything, right, except sort of theft and redistribution of poor people's money into rich people's pockets, but are also used for drug trafficking, rogue states, terrorism, and human trafficking. And now political corruption. Crypto, which very few people use and has no real use in the world, has become a weapon of mass corruption. And it's scary the degree to which it's taking over our politics right now. Hundreds of millions of dollars on hand for the midterms, hundreds of millions of dollars thrown into the 2024 elections. And now AI is rising to do the same thing, to follow the crypto playbook by becoming the biggest spender in politics. If you look at a chart, crypto goes from a zero footprint in politics to boom, the biggest. Nothing grows that fast except for cancer. And that's what crypto is, a cancer in the heart of democracy. And so in a weird way, they're manifesting this prophecy the self-fulfilling prophecy of the sovereign individual. Crypto and AI are rising to challenge the power of government, of democracy, with the threat to disrupt and destroy everything. I mean, amazingly, the main narrative out of the AI companies has been that they're going to kill all the jobs and possibly wipe humanity off the face of the planet. And now they're shocked that it's so unpopular. So that to me is the most stunning thing. Because some people, question the narrative. Is this stuff important? There's still a lot of resistance from mainstream reporters to even think about this stuff or be aware of this stuff. But what I see is that a group of very powerful and influential billionaires has been able to manifest their chosen surreal dystopian idea in our politics, not only through Trump embracing the freedom cities, which is the network state idea, but on the day Trump returned to office, he became a crypto billionaire. Donald Trump, who spent years attacking crypto as a scam and a scam against the dollar, just doing everything he could to stick a knife in the idea of crypto, has now become the crypto bro in chief, as his family rakes in billions of dollars in obscenely corrupt profits from crypto, including foreign governments buying into their coins, people losing billions of dollars to scams run by the president of the United States. And so clearly, he has been taken over by this thing. The only thing Donald Trump cares about is enriching himself and his family and having narcissistic ego power in the world, right? I don't think the guy's got much in terms of politics. He was a Democrat who became a right-wing fascist Republican because that was the character needed to play the role. And at the same time, as Trump is getting wealthy, they're pushing these crypto bills through, right? The crypto cartels were just with Trump in the White House pushing for the Clarity Act. He's got all of Thiel's people, at least 16 of them, according to Bloomberg, in powerful positions. He installed Elon Musk for the first 5 or 6 months of his regime as the CEO dictator of the federal government at Doge. Yarvin had said that a future president should act as an authoritarian and install a CEO to purge the federal government and cut international aid programs, etc. USAID was one of the first things they did, a targeted hit at the poorest children in the world, delivered by the richest man in the world. So these crazy damn ideas have become reality. Crypto and AI and the wealth they generate are in the hands of a small group of men who have been inspired by a disturbingly anti-democratic set of ideas. They're making it happen. They're making it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that if these guys succeed, this becomes one of the most important stories in American history, how the wealthiest men in our country betrayed our country and how very few people were watching it. Because what surprises me about these guys, and most of my book is told in their words, right? I didn't get this from secret documents or secret sources. A lot of it they said on the record. They've told us what they want to do. They've made it very, very clear. That's one thing fascists always do. They spell it out. Here's what we're going to do. The Nazis kind of said exactly what they were going to do, and then they did it. And that's what's happening. If you look at the degree to which Silicon Valley has become the government, and the government has become Silicon Valley, I mean, at least the Trump family is becoming venture capitalists, investors, crypto moguls. Then you add on to that both of them are animated by these apocalyptic religious ideas of a great transformation that's right around the corner. The tech guys through the TESCREAL ideas, transhumanism, extropianism, long-termism, etc. The MAGA base by the evangelical Christian eschatology that Trump is here at the dawn of the apocalyptic era. That bundling of state with corporate, with religion, in this aggressive monopolistic package of power is the heart of fascism.
And perhaps more, we haven't even touched on, or we haven't even mentioned the fact that it's maybe like that whole bundle is maybe best embodied by none other than the vice president, by J.D. Vance, who has both converted to Catholicism, was a venture capitalist, and sort of embraced MAGA after, after criticizing Trump previously in order to sort of find his way into power. So what is J.D. Vance's role in all of this?
My chapter on J.D. Vance is called The Unicorn. because, as you know, in Silicon Valley parlance, a unicorn is a company that you invest in and it suddenly becomes worth billions and billions of dollars someday. One of those investments that really succeeds. And Peter Thiel has been investing in J.D. Vance for a very long time. In fact, you could say that J.D. Vance is a creation of Peter Thiel. They first met in 2011 when Vance was at Yale Law School and Peter Thiel gave a speech there. That speech convinced J.D. Vance not to be a lawyer anymore. He said that it was one of the most significant moments of his life and that Peter Thiel was one of the smartest people, if not the smartest person he'd ever met. A couple years later, he is in Silicon Valley working for Mithril Capital, a company co-founded by Peter Thiel. When Vance goes back to Ohio and starts his own firm, it's with investment from Peter Thiel. When Vance decides to change his religion, he's inspired by the words of Peter Thiel and becomes a Catholic, even though Peter Thiel's not a Catholic. When he decides to become a politician, run for Senate, it's with $15 million from Peter Thiel, setting a record for the largest amount ever spent by an individual to get someone elected to the United States Senate. And when he's being considered for the vice presidency, Vance has a big problem. He has previously referred to Trump as a very bad man, cultural heroine, an opioid of the masses, and America's Hitler. But Peter Thiel and his buddies make the peace. And there is J.D. Vance on the ticket, a man who once called Donald Trump America's Hitler, is now his chief attack dog and the avatar, the puppet, really, of Peter Thiel. I don't think we've ever had someone so close to the presidency, a heartbeat away, who is so clearly a product of one billionaire, Peter Thiel. And I think J.D. Vance is a radical extremist who has quoted Yarvin's words openly. And it's an existential threat to the country if this man rises to power. I often see a lot of people on the liberal side of things thinking, oh, Trump's not going to make it. He's getting old. He's going to die. We don't want that, folks. It gets much worse under Vance. I know you don't believe it, maybe. Mark my words. Vance will do the thing, right? Vance will go all the way. He is nothing except a bundle of ambition and hunger for power, and he serves his master, and his master is Peter Thiel.
Yeah. Now, I want to end by noting that this is all, it's truly unsettling and deeply concerning stuff. These guys have been saying, as you said, what they mean to do, what they believe. There's this immensely powerful cohort that no longer believes in democracy, that says democracy should be out. They're explicitly agitating for that outcome via all of these different undertakings and strategies that they've put forward. In our corner, and what gives me hope is basically two things. One is that for all their wealth, for all their power, for all of their their influence at the moment, they are nonetheless brittle in a way that I think is unique. The modern cohort of tech fascism has mostly taken to staying online, tweeting things out, yelling things out. So it's this veneer, and they believe it. They send the racist memes on X. They have done immense damage, irreparable damage, horrible damage, but they've been able to tear down, right? With Doge, they've fired hundreds of thousands of government workers. They gutted US aid, which will have, as you noted and note in your book, they'll cause immeasurable suffering and harm. They haven't been able to build much in its place. Meanwhile, everybody hates these guys, right? Peter Thiel is fleeing he's got a new place in Argentina, as you note. It seems like Curtis Yarvin is like self-destructing before our eyes. He's publishing his logs of his chats with Claude, and it just seems to be in full-on dissociation mode. Elon Musk is still, the wealthiest man in the planet, can marshal his resources and his capital to support the right causes. But there is a real brittleness here. People hate the big tech. These are uniquely hated people. And doesn't mean that we can beat them, but it does mean that we have the capacity to do so. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Without a doubt. The thing about these guys is they don't really understand how anything works outside of their narrow scope of expertise. I worked in politics for 17 years before returning to journalism. All kinds of city hall politics, state politics, U.S. Capitol Senate politics. It's very complicated and complex to keep the majority of people on your side and to navigate intense disagreements and controversies and somehow remain in power, remain trusted. And these guys don't understand any of that. They just have such a disdain for people and for voters that they are showing they're showing out all the way, and people hate them increasingly. And we're seeing people rise up against the data centers. We're seeing billionaires and the Trump regime sinking rapidly in the polls. And the attitudes on AI, especially from the younger generation. I first heard this a couple of years ago from the kids in my family. They hate AI. They were referring to fake things or lies as AI. And I'm like, where'd you get that? And it turns out they're all doing it. It's like a thing, right? So, but what do you expect when you're telling people that you're basically going to destroy everything and no one's going to have meaning in their life or a job? So the thing, too, about the AI message is that in politics, you always promise to create jobs. You always promise to make people and their families safer. These are inviolable rules of politics. These tech guys have done the opposite because they think they're speaking to their investors. We're going to disrupt everything. It's all going to get destroyed and we're going to harvest the profit. That sounds insane to most people. That sounds terrifying to most people, as does everything Trump is doing right now. All presidents deport immigrants, but they've made a show out of this terror campaign of masked armed goons who have killed people, including American citizens. So, and it's become increasingly unpopular even with people who are conservative. Like, what's going on here? You know, and so I think they've made some crucial mistakes and errors, and they're in danger now of losing it. And you can't really go back from this, from being behind an authoritarian regime. They have taken their masks off. We know who they are. My bigger fear is that they will be able to try again because the Democratic Party is not sufficiently aware of the degree to which these guys have become completely radicalized. And they've got enough money to buy both sides, and that's kind of what they're doing now. All the people around Gavin Newsom, his consultants, are all working for venture capitalists and AI companies and tech right now. And that means Gavin Newsom's going to run for president as a Silicon Valley Democrat who thinks he can bridge the divide. You never see Gavin Newsom criticize Peter Thiel or any of these people. It's only Trump and Vance. You know, he has zero critique of the radicalism of Silicon Valley. In fact, he put together his own Doge that includes people from Coinbase and some of these companies, Andreessen Horowitz, right? So my fear is that over time, the Democrats will remain in love with billionaire money and support, and we'll see these ideas continue to grow in a more careful and considered format, managed along by Democratic consultants who know how to implement these things without scaring the hell out of people. Because right now, they've got a messaging problem, right? So at the same time, I think people are getting radicalized against billionaire power, as it is manifesting in our lives on the land in the form of data centers, the AI trying to eat up everything. Every app you use now is AI, right? It wasn't like this a year and a half ago. You know, I had to get rid of Grammarly, which I'd had for years because it's useful as a solo writer to have something to hunt typos or suggest things. And suddenly it's just like AI all the time. It's like, here, write this with AI. Oh, and now here, detect the AI that we encourage you to write with the AI. What kind of business model sells you the drug and sells you the arrest? You know, they're gonna sell you it and then they're gonna bust you around the corner. It's very weird, desperate model. So I think people are rejecting that. And we have to understand we live in a time of radicalization. The billionaires have become radicalized, and we have to become radicalized in our own way against their power. We can't sleepwalk through this. And the reality is that we can have billionaires or we can have democracy. We cannot have both. And not because we hate wealth or we hate success, but because the billionaires have declared war on us, on our freedom, on our future, on our way of life. And if we don't realize that and find ways to push back, starting with just getting informed about the basic structure of our reality right now, then they will win in the end to some degree. I don't think they'll win much. All these apocalyptic fantasies tend to end in everybody losing. But we have a chance, I think, to roll some of this back and to become a little more aware of the degree to which we have given up our freedom, our privacy, and our brains to this handful of billionaires who seem to get richer every time we take a breath or make a move. And I don't have all the answers. I think part of the problem is men trying to come up with the answers. But I've told, I think, what is the story of what they want and where we're going. And I hope that someone out there will have more of the answer of what we do about it. But I think it involves realizing the degree to which billionaire power is an existential threat to democracy, to humanity, and to the planet itself.
I think we can take some small comfort in the fact that the people, I think, are recognizing that, and they're showing up, and that's all. That is where I start. I agree. It's not up to us to figure out the answers on our podcasts and on our newsletters. It's the people who are now showing up at town hall meetings, protesting data centers, who are mobilizing, who are beginning to fight back against all of these forces that you have diagnosed and described in such detail. And I think I agree. I think like knowing who the enemy is and the shape it takes is a key step in that fight. So thank you for the work you do, and thanks for coming by, and congrats again on the success of the book.
Thank you. You have to come on the Nerd Reich sometime. Talk about your book.
Anytime.
All right.
That's it for today. Thanks to Gil Duran for stopping by to discuss his book, which is The Nerd Reich, Silicon Valley Fascism and the War on Democracy. Pick it up at a bookstore near you. Thanks also to our delightful, top-tier, amazing producer, Ryan Hodis, which I really want.
Blush.
Look at that. Look at that, folks. Some backstory. I really was hoping that his last name would be pronounced Hodes, so that I could then, adopt a nickname Nodes, like as a cyberpunk vibe. I'm still hoping maybe we can make that happen somehow. Would you be like Nodes? What do you think about Nodes?
We can go with it. Everybody mispronounces my last name, so it's nothing new.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can organically start to slot that in. Very organically, not by sheer force of will at all.
He's brought it up several times. It's definitely organic.
Yeah, really organic. I'm going to make this happen. Thanks also to Kate Osborne, to Corinne Shadme for the art, the music. The intro music is by myself and my good friend Ryan Hall. And am I forgetting anybody? Oh, yes, all of you, the listeners, thank you so much for tuning into the show. We are growing each and every week. It's been amazing. Please subscribe, like, comment, do all those things that help a podcast if you are so inclined to help it continue to grow. Okay, I think that's it. Until next time, keep those hammers up.